Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call the September 11th, 2017 Bernards Township Board of Education meeting to order. The board already met in executive session and saluted the flags, so can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrne?
Here.
Dr. Dunton?
Here.
Mrs. Richmond?
Here.
Mr. Fry?
Here.
Mrs. Korn?
Here.
Mrs. Gray?
Here.
Mrs. McCune?
Here.
Mrs. Woldridge?
Here.
Mrs. Swerner?
Here.
Mr. Markarian?
Here.
Mr. Syatt?
Here.
Madam President?
Good evening, everyone. Before we get started with our board meeting this evening, I thought it would be appropriate if we just took a moment of silence. Obviously, today is September 11th, a date that isn't lost on anyone in our country as to its significance. In addition, we've had some really horrific hurricanes going on in the form of Hurricane Harvey and Irma in Texas and Florida, respectively. So if you would observe a moment of silence with me, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. And for all of you affected by any of these tragedies in our history and our most recent history, certainly our thoughts and prayers are with you and your families. I know a lot of us have been talking about folks that we know both in Texas and Florida, so I hope that all of your families come through okay and hopefully without a lot of property damage.
Thank you, Mr. Markarian. With that, we're up to item number 6, the Statement of Public Notice. As always, I am not going to read it to you, but there are agendas available on the stage if you'd like to peruse it. There will be 2 opportunities for public comment. The first time you can do public comment on any agenda item. The second time you can address the board on any topic that is on your mind. We always remind you to try to keep your comments to 5 minutes or less in length. And with that, we're up to something exciting and new. We have a new student representative for this school year, RJ Milligan, and I think he has a report from the student governing body.
I do. We had our first 3 days of school, and they went very smoothly. We had our class assemblies, seniors and juniors went on Friday, and then today we had freshmen and sophomores that spoke during them, and everybody seemed to like Mr. Krause. He went through everything and went very smoothly. Now we're looking forward to having our first full week of school coming up. Nothing really too special, and the new speakers that everyone voted on here were used by a soccer team, and they sounded really good, and we're looking forward to using them coming up. And also for student government, we have the elections coming up next week to have the grade level representatives, so we have everything for that. And also the whole school is very excited. This Friday we have big football home opener against Westfield, so everyone's very excited about that.
Great. I know I'll be at the game. Do we have any questions for Mr. Milligan? Well, welcome. We hope you enjoy participating in our meetings. As I tell every other student representative, you are welcome to stay here and enjoy the full meeting, or if you'd prefer to go home and get some homework done, please get out of here and do what you need to do. Thanks so much.
All right, but before you go, RJ, I had the opportunity to meet RJ last week. I forget who it was that introduced us, but it was just a brief moment in the hall. I think you were sitting on the bench outside the main entrance in the foyer area, the guidance office? Yeah. Okay. So RJ seemed like a really nice guy and obviously very humble because he didn't mention the football game from this past Friday where I had the opportunity, I confess, to only be there briefly because when it started pouring, I ran. But congratulations on this past Friday's game against Montgomery as well.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. All right, we are up to superintendent's report. Mr. Markarian, do you have anything you care to report?
Yes, just a few things. We had a successful opening of school. I'm very pleased with how things went, and I wanted to share a little bit about that. First and foremost, I want to start with a few thank yous. Over the course of every summer, we have a lot that goes on in order to get us to the point where we can have our classes and get things going. And a lot of people put in a lot and are continuing to do so, in particular as we work through a new student information system, which is obviously a big challenge for us. So for starters, on my left, I just wanted to thank our Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Syatt, who handles all of the hiring and the professional development, of which much does occur over the course of the school year. I believe it was 43 professional staff that Mr. Syatt processed for employment, in addition to a countless number of aides that you also hired in order to fill all of our needs. On my right, Mr. McLaughlin was instrumental, as he always is, with our facilities in the summertime in order to get the buildings ready, to get the buildings clean, and also to work with his team on completing maintenance projects in addition to significant capital projects, specifically this summer, a very large project at Oak Street School to install new heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in many classrooms there, and another significant project at Ridge High School where the track was resurfaced. So just another great job by both the gentlemen sitting up here this evening in helping to get schools ready for opening. In addition to that, I know I mentioned the Aspen student information system. Out in the audience there, Dr. Heineman is sitting there, and Ms. Shadis would have joined us tonight if she is here? She came? Oh, where is she? Oh, there she is. Thanks for coming, Jillian. Thank you. I wasn't sure that she was going to make it, but thank you for being here tonight, Jillian. So I just wanted to shout out to both Dr. Heineman and Ms. Shadis for all of the work that they have put in with regard to the new student information system. Dr. Heineman has taken the lead in getting that system off the ground, and he's done just a tremendous amount of work in making that happen. And I know it's not perfect. I know there are lots of things that we need to work out. But just bringing us this far was a huge task. I just wanted to let you know how hard he worked on that. And at the high school this summer, we had a little bit of a challenge. We had one of our assistant principals who has been instrumental in doing scheduling, wasn't available to be with us over the summer, and Ms. Shadis really stepped up and took on extra work in her new role as director of school counseling and really came through in helping us to work through the master schedule. So I just wanted to thank both Dr. Heineman and Ms. Shadis for all of that work. In addition, Dr. Heineman is responsible for managing our curriculum projects, and obviously, you know, we do a lot of those in the summer as well. Finally, I wanted to mention that with the new student information system, we're managing our data in a new way, and we're learning to do so, as you can imagine. So it's been a little bit harder to do our annual head counts, if you will. So some of these numbers are a little bit out of date, and I do need to update them, and I certainly will do so at the next board meeting, I would imagine, in a couple weeks. So I can probably give you more accurate numbers. We have a lot of students that register in the last week of summer, in the first week of school. I just passed the school nurse here at Ridge on the way to the meeting tonight. What's she doing here? It's 7 o'clock. And she was working on processing something like 70 new students she was telling me about that had just registered in the last couple weeks. So I don't know if those were all at Ridge or not, but she was letting me know that there was a lot going on in the first week with registration. So, you know, I'll report out more accurately in the next couple weeks, but it looks like we had a little bit of a dip of enrollment at Cedar Hill, around a dozen students less, about 20 students less at Liberty Corner, 24 students fewer at Mount Prospect, 41 fewer at Oak Street, 33 fewer at Annan, and about 25 fewer at Ridge. Now, I share those numbers with you knowing that they're a couple weeks old. So I promise to give you something a little bit more comprehensive and more accurate in a couple weeks' time, but I didn't want you to think that I had forgotten that people are curious as to our opening numbers. So I haven't forgotten about that, and when we get these Aspen reports working a little bit better, I'll update you on those numbers again.
Great. We are now up to public comment on agenda items only. Once again, please come up, sign in, state your name and address, Try to limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. Are there any public comments on agenda items only? All right, so we're going to move along to committee reports, starting with finance. It looks like there is one item. May I have a motion, please? Mrs. Wooldridge, may I have a second? Mr. Fry. Mrs. Wooldridge, anything to explain before we vote?
Okay, well, at the last meeting, I didn't do a complete finance report on the August 24th meeting. So I wanted to kind of fill in some of the additional details tonight. So the Finance Committee did meet August 24th, and we talked about a number of topics. We talked about the Ridge Cafeteria and food service, and I wanted to preface my report by saying that this is more or less like background information. The board has not made any decisions about pursuing any of these projects yet, but it's background information that we would need in order to make a decision at some point in the future, whatever that might be. So the first thing we talked about was the changes to the Ridge Cafeteria in a bit more detail than we had in July. So Tony Katana from the Spiesel Architecture Group presented the committee with a preliminary floor plan and budget for 4 possible options for a new food production facility with serving lines at Ridge. And there were 4 different options that were in different locations, all at the back of the building. And the cost ranged from $3.6 million to $4.4 million, depending on the option. And all the options would require additional parking spaces and widening the road behind the high school to allow for food deliveries. The second topic was information about the impact of doing a unit lunch on the Ridge food service. So the Ridge food, and again, this is background information. It's not something that we've decided to do. The Ridge food service generates more than $400,000 in revenue yearly, and of that, $300,000 is used to offset the cost of school lunch aids at all the district schools, and the rest of it is used to offset capital or equipment needs for the food services programs in the district. So Mr. McLaughlin presented information from Advocate, the district's food service consultant, about the impact of a unit lunch on Ridge food service costs and revenue for 2 different scenarios. The first would be if we were to build a new food production facility, and the second would be if we were instead to install about 10 kiosks inside the building, which would be used to have some like sandwiches and stuff available, and then there'd be like a cash line. And in both of these scenarios, additional seating would be needed, and additional servers and custodial staffs would also be needed. So for the new food production facility, in the first year, there'd be an estimated loss of about 20% of revenue, or approximately $112,000, which includes a labor cost of about $50,000 for 10 additional food service workers. Custodial staff would also be necessary to set up tables, break down tables, and do cleanup in the halls and atrium areas used where the students would be eating lunch. Then with the kiosks, the full menu would not be available for all the students. So there would be an estimated loss of 35% of revenue every year, about $160,000, which includes an ongoing labor cost of about $50,000 for the 10 additional food service workers necessary to man the kiosks. This scenario would potentially require significant additional custodial staff to set up the tables, break down the tables, clean up the hall and atrium areas used by the students. In the first year, we would need to purchase the kiosks for serving the pre-made sandwiches and drinks, as well as add electrical services for the stations. And then so the total first-year loss would be about $459,000, plus additional custodial labor costs to be determined. Okay, and then We already went through the capital projects at the last meeting. The next topic was a discussion of the long-term debt service plan for the district. So in 2015, the district reported that the long-term debt had some substantial increases coming up in years 2023 to 2030 because of the way the debt issued after the 2005 referendum was structured. The district then formulated and adopted a policy for management of its long-term debt in July 2016. So the policy calls for the Board of Ed to pursue such action as necessary to preserve its high-quality credit rating and smooth future debt levies. The policy provides for conservative budgeting, budget management, and as appropriate, establishing reserves to defease segments of the outstanding long-term debt, which are identified as contributing to the increases in the local debt levy. So as part of its annual June review and funding of various reserves, the district has been addressing this need as operational results permit. And since 2012, the district has saved $10.2 million by refinancing $74.3 million in bonds and has enhanced its bond rating from a AA up to a AAA. The $10.2 million in savings includes defeasance of $1 million in outstanding debt at the time of the May 2016 refunding of 2006 outstanding bonds. And as a result, the debt levy has decreased 11.5% per year, or approximately $663,000 per year. And then this was something that we approved at the last meeting, but I just wanted to mention that we approved a new individual to perform demographic services, and it's a company called Statistical Forecasting, LLC. The executive director has a doctorate in educational statistics and measurement from Rutgers, and the client list of the company includes over 80 public school districts in New Jersey, including Bridgewater, Raritan, Milburn, Montgomery Township, Princeton, Chatham, West Windsor, Plainsboro, and Mendham Borough. So does anyone have any questions? No?
No. I just want to point out with hiring this new organization to do our demography, I would be remiss in not saying that we have been so fortunate over many, many years to have Mr. Draper providing us with that service. He has retired from doing it for us, but we just need to acknowledge all his incredible years of service, and we'll probably be doing something more formal moving forward. So with that, may we have a vote on the one finance item, please?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Dunton?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Madam President?
All right, we're now up to the Personnel Committee report. I believe we have 21 items to move. May I have a motion, please? Anyone? Mrs. Korn, may I have a second? Mrs. Gray? Mrs. McEwen or Mr. Syed, is there anything that needs to be addressed before we vote?
Yeah, actually, we are going to table the first item on number 7, so we need to have a motion to move items 1 through 21 without that first item on number 7.
Wait, I'm sorry, which one are we tabling?
The first item on number 7, it has a whole bunch of items, number 7. We're tabling just the first one.
Can you just repeat
Okay,
that?
I'm
We couldn't-
confused
You can't hear me?
because my
I'm
agenda
sorry.
goes 1, 3, 3, 4.
1.
And
I
I
should say
know,
1,
but-
2, 3,
So we're
4.
tabling 1 through 7?
No, just on number 7, we're tabling the first item on number 7.
Oh, just the
First
first item on
item
number
on
7?
number 7.
Okay. So it's just
Yes.
one individual on number
Right,
7?
so we're
All right,
moving.
may I have
yeah.
a motion to table the first item of number 7? Mrs. Gray? May I have a second? Mrs. Richmond?
Okay.
All right, now do
Okay.
I need? All right, so let's vote on tabling the, okay, by voice vote, all in favor? Okay. Any opposition? Great. All right, so now we're back to voting on everything except the one sub-item we omitted. Is there anything to discuss or present before we move
No,
forward?
personnel is going to meet this Friday, so we don't have a report.
Okay. Are there any questions about any of these items before we vote? All right, may we have a vote, please, Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Dunton?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Madam President?
Policy Committee, is there anything to report this evening?
We have not had a meeting since our last board meeting. At that time, we had some second readings. We do have a couple for first that will go into second reading. Our meeting is set for next week, and we will report out at next board meeting.
Great, thank you, Mr. Fry. So next, we are up to the Curriculum Committee report. I believe there is one item to move. May I have a motion, please? Mrs. Wooldridge, may I have a second? Mrs. Richmond? Mrs. Gray?
Nothing to report. We met on Friday, and I'll be reporting, the past Friday, and I'll be reporting out at the next public meeting.
Any questions about our curriculum item before we vote?
I might,
Mr. Byrne?
the district curriculum alignment, is that something issued by the state? Is everybody using, what type of criteria do they ask for?
Not sure how to answer your question. It is issued by the state. As it reads in the item, it says alignment of district curricula with the state board adopted standards. So that's,
Now, does that mean that you can't have differences of opinion? Everyone must,
it means that we have to comply by the standards.
no, is that the hours in the year that you have to have class in history? And
No, this
It's
is the
the
curriculum
content
standards.
of our curriculum. It doesn't say what has to be in our curriculum. It just says that in the curriculum that we develop as a district, we are aligned with the state standards. It's an annual thing. We do it every year.
See, I was just wondering how important, we have to do it, obviously, but I wondered how important it was. Okay. You have to do it. It's important.
Any other questions? May we have a vote, please?
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Dr. Dunton?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Madam President?
All right, we are up to the Advocacy Committee report. Mrs. Richmond?
Advocacy met this morning, and I didn't have a chance to get the minutes out today with our full load of meetings today. So I will be getting those out this week and reporting out. The only thing to mention from that meeting and now with the full board is that we got an invitation to attend the 21st District meeting with Senator Kane and Assemblywoman Munoz tomorrow, and Bev, or Mrs. Warner, sorry. Yes. And I will be attending that tomorrow afternoon. We are going to talk to them about, obviously, the funding issues and thank them for the extra money that we received this year, but still push for more, gently. And we're going to talk to them about, tell them that we use the SDA grants for all of our HVAC projects, and we're going to talk to them gently about park and see if we can try to shrink the amount of time that, encourage them to shrink the amount of time that is used up for park testing in our district, because it's become kind of a burden.
Yeah. We have a little loophole opening. Senator Kane has discussed with us previously, he is a proponent of park testing, but with the new Every Student Succeeds Act, the state has more flexibility on how they administer educational policies. So we're hopeful that even if park doesn't go away entirely, we can address the issue of the amount of park testing that's required and how disruptive it is to our students and maybe lessen the burden. And now we'd like to open it up to board discussion. Mrs. Richmond gave a really good overview of our talking points. We're hopeful Assemblyman Bramnick may be there as well. They're not sure yet. But it's an opportunity to get in front of our legislators, to let them know which issues are concerning us. I think the common opinion among the legislators and the New Jersey School Board's legislative committee that we work with is that not a whole lot of change is going to happen until there's a new governor in place, but this is planting the seeds for what's important to us and what we think we're going to need once the dust settles. So does anyone else have any topics that they think would be useful to bring up with our legislative leaders when we meet with them tomorrow? Mrs. Korn?
I know you already mentioned park, but I'm going there anyway. What I'd like to know, or you can ask them, you can be as nice as you want, when I was down in Trenton and the Assembly's Education Committee passed a resolution stating that the State Board of Ed had overstepped their bounds by making a park test a graduation requirement. Okay, so everyone knows that. So it's been held up in the Senate because they won't post the bill. And I was wondering why Senator Kane couldn't put a little more pressure on Sweeney to get it posted, because it is a detriment to not only our district, but to the entire state. Now, I know we're only supposed to worry about our own district, but I would kind of like to know and it's already been, their colleagues have called it a overstepping. It's illegal what they did. So I'm not sure, and even Senator Sweeney and the educational chairwoman also came out and made a statement about them not agreeing and that they should be redone, but nothing has happened. Okay. So my question to them would be, what is the wait? Why are we doing this? I know that they're changing. I know the governorship is changing, so that's a big deal. I know there's other political things involved, but something that I feel very strong about, everyone knows, and that I really do feel has been a huge drag down and detriment to our district and many other districts. And why are they dragging their feet for something that's really, something that affects all of our kids? And especially, I have a 5th grader still, and it's an issue. And I feel like if someone's done something illegal and we have to live with it, it doesn't seem fair. So I think it's a question that should be asked, like, why would they just let it happen or let it continue in this?
I think that's a reasonable question that we can put in the context of our other ESSA questions about park. Yeah.
And of course, the money thing.
Yeah, the money. It's always the money.
always great.
It's always the money thing. And of course, we'll be reporting out at our next public meeting on what we hear. Are there any other topics, Dr. Dunton?
I just haven't kept up, so I don't know if this is totally laid to rest, the whole thing with the school bus drivers and the commercial licenses. Is any follow-up required on that, or is that resolved?
Yeah, there was some legislation passed at the federal level that is lessening the burden of requirements to get that commercial driver's license. So we're anticipating the problem easing up. I know Mrs. Wooldridge sits on Ed Services Commission. Have you gotten any feedback that the problem's been alleviated a little bit this year?
No, the problem has been alleviated for our district this year because Somerset County Ed Services is no longer servicing Somerset Hills School District.
So we got their drivers.
So we got their drivers, at least for this year. We're in better shape, but I haven't heard anything new regarding the commercial driver's licenses.
Okay, that's a good question to follow up.
Yeah, that is a good question.
We can still thank them again because if for those of you who don't remember, the last time we met in Senator Kane's office when we brought up this issue, his staff marched us right into Congressman Lance's office, made Congressman Lance aware of the issue, his staff aware of the issue, and that led to the resolution of the easing up of the legislation. So things can get done sometimes, which is good. and very heartwarming. Any other topics? Mrs. McEwen?
This is sort of a follow-up on what Mrs. Korn just said, and also what you guys said about ESSA before. I guess I would just push a little bit more as to, this is the first time in a long time that the state has had this much power to make to have more latitude, since No Child Left Behind. So the state has a lot of control over what they put into place, and I guess I'm concerned. We have a lot of new State Board of Education members, and a lot of turnover in different positions in the Department of Education. How involved, I don't really know how it works with the education committee and stuff. How involved do they plan on being in paying attention to what gets put in place? Because it concerns me that something will get thrown together too quickly.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, and I'll cut to the chase, there's been some turnover in the State Board of Education. It appears that some of the appointees are a little more qualified to address educational issues, which is good. We want to know, are our representatives watching what they're doing and making sure they understand we've got this latitude and we want to use it for good changes? Okay. Now, as always, we can't promise we're going to get everything, and we're not the only school district there. We tend to be the only school district that shows up with a list, so we usually get through at least half of it. Mr. Byrne?
I wanted to talk, and I think my memory is correct. Years ago with the Iowa test, we got feedback on which problems or which items the kids missed, and so you got a feel for weaknesses and strengths in your program. Common Core and Park, as far as I know, we're not getting that feedback, and I think that's very important. So I think an important part is to get that feedback back again so we can see on a state level, how the district is, or even more important, on a district level, how we're doing. Are we doing, and where are the areas of strengths and weaknesses? I don't think we're getting that from Park or Common Core, and I think that was important. So I think the Iowa test provided that.
Okay, thank you. Any other ideas? Great, so we're going to get our list together. We're going to brainstorm in the car right over to Westfield tomorrow, and we'll report out in 2 weeks. So with that, we are to liaison committee reports. Is there anything this evening? Mrs. Woldridge?
Yeah. I have a report on the Municipal Alliance meeting. So the Municipal Alliance had its first meeting of the school year on September 5th. And so the first item was they, every year in June, they have their major fundraiser, which is the Twilight Challenge. And they raised over $7,000 this year, which is really good. It met their goal. And then the second item had to do with the statewide 2017 Lindsay Meyer Teen Institute, which took place from August 21st to August 25th. 30 students from Bernards Township attended this year, which is a very large group for that program, including 22 campers and 9 youth advisory leaders who help run the program. In addition, the Bernards Township RAD group, the Ridge Against Alcohol and Drugs group, won an award there. It was the Motivation Award, so that's really excellent. And there are a lot of events, like just this whole list of events scheduled for September and October, but I'm just going to run through a couple of highlights. So this week, actually, it's Suicide Prevention Week at Ridge High School, and Municipal Alliance is working on this in partnership with the Ridge PTO. There is a knockout opioid abuse event at Bernards High School on October 10th at 7 p.m., which is free and open to the public from throughout the Somerset Hills and anybody else that wants to go. This was postponed from last March, and guest speakers include Michael Robertson, who's the Somerset County prosecutor, Greg Benson, a substance abuse counselor, and Assemblyman Jack Chitterelli from the Hillsborough area. On October 16th at 7 p.m. in the Bernards Township Town Hall, there's a program called Empowering Your Teen with Love and Logic. It's done in collaboration with the Basking Ridge Indian community. And finally, on October 27th is the all-day Empowerment Day at William Anna Middle School. This is an all-day program for 8th graders put on by the Municipal Alliance.
Great, thank you. Are there any other liaison reports?
Can I just ask you to repeat the Empowerment Day
The
date?
Empowerment Day, it's October 27th.
Thank you.
And I just want to reiterate how proud we are of our RAD, our Ridge Against Drugs group. They just win awards year after year, and more importantly, are doing some good work on behalf of our students, and we appreciate their efforts. Next is the Ad Hoc SEL Committee. Is there anything to report this evening?
The committee's meeting on
that the-
September 14th, which is Thursday.
Thank you. All right, so now we are up to item number 17, public comment on non-agenda items. Anyone who has any issue they'd like to address the board on, we welcome you to come up, sign in, state your name and address. Please try to limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, and remember you are welcome to speak just once during each comment session. Is there anyone who has any comments for the board?
Hello, my name is Al Licata. I'm a Basking Ridge resident. I'm here today because we're all aware of the recent hurricane activity in the country, and I'm talking about the community service program that the children have to enroll in and make their hours. Is there any concerted effort with the school, and who would we talk to about coordinating with groups in the township that are actually doing projects to benefit those communities in need? I'm aware of 3, one I belong to, but 3 that are actually doing and have done programs to send items down to Florida and Texas and Louisiana. So I'm just asking if there's, I don't know, some conduit that we can use to contact the school, or if the school is doing a concerted effort to get the information in the kids' hands.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other public comments? All right, I'm going to close public comment section. Mr. Markarian, can you address the one?
Sure. I'll have to ask the principals. I heard of something I think that was going on at Annan, but I wouldn't be surprised if the other schools are up to something as well. So I can get that information and figure out who you might be able to talk to about that, but typically the principals could connect you. But I'll find out. Thank you.
Great. So we are now up to board forum, and we have a fun topic for this evening. We're going to discuss and possibly finalize our board goals for the upcoming school year. Mr. Markarian, do you have them to just kind of read and repeat?
Sure.
So people remember?
Yeah, so we started to talk about this, I believe it was in July, but just to review, we had 3 that I thought might be something that the board would want to handle. The first one was reviewing a document that was published by New Jersey school boards titled Fundamentals of School Board Membership, and to review school board governance with a representative from New Jersey School Boards Association. So I think it's really great to have a goal that you know you can check off. And after today's earlier board training meeting, that might be something you could almost do right off the bat. The other goal was to maintain the ad hoc SEL committee that had been started last year, but to continue that for the 17-18 school year. And then the third goal was to follow up with the Technology Steering Committee's recommendations. I reworded this a little bit. Consider observing classroom lessons to understand how Chromebooks could enhance instruction in the SAMR model. Discuss both with teachers, administrators, and as a board to develop a position on the student device initiative, which was something that came up as part of the Technology Steering Committee's recommendations from last year. So what we had talked about briefly over the summer, my feeling was, having listened to the board's feedback on that they might like to start off with sort of a status review of where the District Technology Steering Committee had left off in looking at each of the elementary, middle, and high school plans and reports that the committee had done. And we have a new district technology coordinator. Our IT coordinator is Alex Blinder, and Alex has been busy getting up to speed on all of the district's various computer equipment and needs and inventories. And I asked him if he thought he might be able to participate in such a meeting with the board to talk to you guys about the Technology Steering Committee from last year. And he thought that at our second meeting, our next meeting in September, he would be able to do that. So if you are interested in pursuing that goal, I would affirm with Alex to come prepared at the next board meeting to talk, along with Tom Miziak.
So what questions, comments, concerns do you have with these goals, or are you loving them? Mr. Byrne?
I'd like to pick up on the first one, our session this afternoon, talking about the fundamentals of school board performance. I think the strengths and weaknesses of the district was one of the items highlighted, and I would like to see that part of a administrative feedback to the board, areas that they think are important to improve. And that was listed this afternoon.
Okay.
Well, the board goals are supposed to be goals that we are going to do as a board. So certainly if the board, you know, in the context of committees and other stuff, wants specific data and stuff, that would be sort of a separate thing. But like, we have to come up with goals that we as a board actually are doing ourselves. So I don't know that it fits in.
And those
Well,
are different than
we
district
read the
goals.
book and had the presentation, and if in reading the book we come up with an area that we think is very important, I'm not suggesting that we come up with the strengths and weaknesses and the corrective active programs, but I am saying that the administration provide this to the board, and one of our functions would be to review them and see if we can find ways to improve the district.
Okay. Any other commentary? No? Mrs. Corn, do you?
I think when we talk about the fundamentals, this which is awesome, I guess, but I just think it's important to kind of discuss it as a board to really know what we're supposed to be doing, and being new, it's good for me, and I don't know if it has to be in a structured way, or if you have to say, okay, we're going to read this much and talk about it, or I don't know how that works, so.
Well, I think, you know, our session today, and for those of you who weren't with us, we spent 2 hours today with a field service rep from the New Jersey School Boards Association getting a refresher on board responsibilities. But have you had your new board member training yet?
Yeah, lots of it.
Oh,
you mean, no.
Yeah,
No, I haven't
when
done
you
that yet.
go
That's
either
October.
in October at school boards, or
Yeah.
you're going to be getting it in a deep dive with new school board members from all around the state, more than you'd ever want to know, and it's very useful. And then I think once you've done that, if you still have issues or concerns,
Okay.
bring them back, and if we think it's an issue that the board as a whole needs to discuss, we can certainly arrange for another retreat or a board forum conversation about it.
That's what I was curious about.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a couple people after the meeting today were saying, oh, they could have kept talking, you know, it was really good. So maybe we could just periodically have it as part of board forum where people, you know, talk about their thoughts, or if they have questions too, about just our roles and stuff like that, whatever.
And Gwen Thornton, the field service rep, was excellent today,
she's
so if
great.
we had a big enough list, I'm sure she'd love to come back and join us, so.
I kind of want to piggyback on what
We
Jen
can't
said,
hear you at all.
and correct me if I'm wrong. I was getting the sense that you were talking about us rather than individual board member training.
Yeah, I'm
The
talking
board
about
member
us.
training is great, and it's very informative.
I was talking about us understanding how we work together.
That's kind of
and
what my take was on
not
your
how
comment.
we're-
Oh, I apologize.
No, that's
I
okay.
misunderstood.
As a board, how,
Right,
we're-
how we function as
Yes.
a full board.
yes. That's
Yeah.
what I was talking about.
I
Which
thought,
don't
I
know.
thought that might be it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I know this tells you how you're supposed to be a board member, but then in practice,
Right, how we're doing that together.
how we do, like at the meeting like we had today was great, because it gives you like a good idea of what you can do, what you can't do, how you're supposed to work together and get things done, or make decisions for the school, or, you know, just like that, like talking in front of all these great people here and let them know how we feel and where we stand on things, and, you know, I just think it's important, and I think that if we it doesn't have to be every time, obviously, we all want to get out of here at some point, but, just to let people know where we stand and as a board, how we work, how it, even for us ourselves, to remind ourselves, how it works and, what we're supposed to be doing as a board.
Which
Does
is,
that make sense?
yeah, and which is why I think it's a great board goal, because this is something, we don't just have to check it off now, we can revisit it on an ongoing basis for the next 2 years. So, are we ready to vote on the board goals?
Can I request that, Nick, if you wouldn't mind, could you reread the third goal, please?
Sure. Review the Technology Steering Committee's recommendations and consider observing classroom lessons to understand how Chromebooks enhance instruction in the SAM-R model. Semicolon, discuss both with teachers, administrators, and as a board to develop a position on the student device initiative.
So I have two questions. One
Yep.
is, what's the time, we're talking about 17, 18 board goals, right?
Right.
So what is the target time frame for a request for the board to vote?
So, sorry, forgot about the microphone. So, obviously, we have a budget, and our budget cycle gets going pretty soon, and we need to have some decisions made January timeframe, February timeframe, if we're going to make any significant budget expenditure decisions about the student device initiative question. If we were going to make, say, for example, a significant investment in Chromebooks, buying more Chromebooks for classrooms, something like that. So I think what I had talked a little bit about in July was the idea of having a presentation in September and some board dialogue about the recommendations that came out of the District Technology Steering Committee at elementary, middle, and high school levels. And then if the board liked what it heard, that we would spend some time in October arranging for classroom visits, if the board wanted to do that, to see the devices in action, to see how the technology enhances instruction at a level that goes beyond what is conceivable without the technology. And, if necessary, have continuing conversation to see if you need more information. But at some point, you start to run into the budget cycle, which isn't to say that you can't defer a decision to the following year. You could certainly do that. It's just that if you were to make a decision that impacted something in the 18-19 school year, that it really needs to kind of get sorted out around January so that you can really get it into the budget.
Second question, not to give away, but as a tease maybe to next time, will we be getting detailed information about how devices are currently being used and the benefits of that, how much time Chromebooks are sitting on carts not being used, things of that, like some anecdotally, several of us, in one-on-one conversations have expressed the same concerns of not really having heard much about it, except that two-pager that came out through finance with the proposal.
Right.
So when does that come?
Right. So what I thought we would do is start by looking at the presentations that the teacher committees put together through the steering committee, because I think that'll say a lot about the teachers in the classroom and how they envision the use of the technology and how it can help them. To your point about can we get some metrics on current use of existing Chromebooks, that would be a question that I could ask Alex Blinder. And maybe it comes out in our conversation in 2 weeks, this is what we want. How could we do that? Is that doable? And Alex could be here to tell us if that's doable or not. For example, does our network allow us to see when any given Chromebook device is online and in use versus sitting not in use on a rack somewhere, right? And at what capacity are they being used? Or if you go to the fleet at the middle school, how much are they used in a given day? The elementary school, the high school, can we compare and get information like that? And it may take us a little bit more time to get as much information as the board feels is necessary to make a decision, and that's okay. But I think, to your point, to try to have a sense of, well, when would we have to make a decision on this? When you're ready and you have enough information. But if it's to affect next school year, then by January-ish.
We're check,
I
okay. Mr. Byrne?
I have a couple more, and I probably want to disagree a little bit. I think a board goal ought to be to encourage the administration to improve the measurable performance of all the students in the district academically. I don't think I've seen that as a broad goal of this board, and I think it ought to be. No,
we-
wait a minute.
But we've been through this before, Mr.
Well,
Byrne.
it doesn't matter.
Our board goals have been rejected because we have been told very clearly there are district goals, and what you're saying is an excellent district goal, but right now we're working on board
It is
goals.
one of our district
This is
goals.
my goal. It's the only reason I'm here, is I want to improve the performance of the kids in the district.
Which our first district goal right now that we've already approved is to improve the academic, outcomes
Fine.
of students.
The
We already
second
have that
one,
as a district goal.
I don't remember a drug and alcohol report in the last year,
We had one this spring.
Yeah.
okay?
You spoke to Jody D'Agostini at the end of it, if you recall.
Well, I could be losing it a little bit, and I would admit that I probably am. I want to know, what are we doing to really cut back on the drug and alcohol use? I haven't seen great improvement. It's almost a constant. And I think we ought to be working harder to try and find a way to help the kids in the district. The short classroom time, 43 minutes, I think is a major issue for the district. And I think the board ought to be asking the administration to be thinking about that, because once again, it's a major issue. And if you don't ask anybody to do it, I don't care about the ad hoc committee. I would like to see that done at the full board, but I don't think it's the most important thing that we're here for. The evaluation of new programs, and I would throw STEM in, or STEAM, whatever we might want to call it, as one of the items that we want on a regular basis to get feedback from the administration. Again, a board goal. I don't think the board gets measured on being a board. I think the board gets measured on the performance of the district. Computer use. Are all of the kids getting as much as they need on how to use the computer? It's our modern world, and I would want to make sure that that program is properly covered in the school program. And lastly, career planning. We're talking about STEM and the doctor, MD program, and the engineering program, and what have you. I'd like to see the kids get some exposure on what different careers are. What's it like to be an accountant? What's it like to be a teacher? What's it like to be a doctor? What's involved with the hours and how much time in school? I think these are areas that I would like to see a lot more focus on. So, as one board member, that's my opinion.
Any other comments?
I just have a request for clarification. Am I imagining this, Nick, or do we not have in our district goals something about examining the rotating drop schedule and the possible increase of time on task?
Yeah.
So that's already in materials that you've seen. One of the things you just requested about the 43 minutes being too short.
Can you tell me what the improvement is in that versus the current?
The goal.
What is the average weekly or daily rate for each class under this new program?
There's no new program, just bear with me.
No, it is a new program.
Bear with me for a moment as I complete the sentence. We have a district goal that includes a commitment to examine a rotating drop schedule as a possible schedule change at Ridge High School. That would afford us a measurably larger time on task per subject area.
It's not much larger.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I think there are other ways to do it. I don't remember any
But now
big
is not the
discussion.
time to discuss the nuances of proposals.
Well, I
We're
understand,
just
but
approving goals.
yes, we have talked about the grouping schedule. But we haven't discussed strengths and weaknesses, and are there other options? There's a whole lot to be done in this. We already know that cost is going to be a consideration. And I don't think the improvement's very much. That's my opinion. I thought it was 5% or 10%, maybe it's 20, but it's not gigantic.
Is everyone else prepared to vote on our board goals? Heads on. Okay, and, oh, John? Mr.
You
Fry?
said who is.
Oh, good. And I was told we don't need to do a roll call vote, just by a show of hands. Who's in favor of moving forward with the board goals that we have been discussing? Is anyone opposed?
Yes.
Okay. It looks like we will be moving forward with these board goals. Are there any other topics for board forum? Mr. Fry?
We had several board forums about grading from the inside out. And I was wondering what the result of the teachers' feedback. Is this something that was open and discussed, or is it, have we changed the way we're grading, or are we still in the working it out?
Good question. Yeah, so we actually are in year 2 of looking at assessment in the district, and we did survey our staff at the end of last year. We read that book, and I shared anecdotally some of the information from that survey at our district in-service on the 5th. And what we looked at was the themes that came out of the anecdotal information we collected from staff. We had several hundred staff members take the survey, about 400, and what came out of that was pretty universal willingness to look at their grading practices and to look at ways to try to enhance content acquisition. I think everybody was in agreement that at the end game in any course is that students walk away with an understanding of the material and an application of the material. So what we've done was we brought in our speaker of the 5th, Rick Wormley, to build further on some of the themes in that book. That book was actually a recommendation of his. We looked at bringing, I know, and he didn't write it, right? Yeah. So we looked at actually bringing Mr. Wormley in 2 years, well, the beginning of last school year, and he had suggested we weren't ready for that yet. We needed a common language, and so the common language was reading, grading from the inside out, and talking about assessment practices, homework, group work, ways to, again, enhance instruction, but really at the end of the day, make sure students walk away with an understanding. And what Rick talked to the staff about was some, and he talked about this, was some revolutionary ideas to kind of shock them a little bit. He shared some really good things that they could start the year with. A lot of reflective exercises for students to look at, for instance, when they don't do well on something, to look at why they didn't do well. So a lot of metacognition, which we liked a lot. I think the staff responded well. So I did another survey of Rick Wormley's presentation. We're up to 250 staff that responded to that. And I shared with the PTO advisory this morning that it's rare that you can get 90% affirmation on anything that you do with anybody, but we had 90% respond favorably to Mr. Wormley, where they felt that the information he shared was relevant to what they do. So I was pleased with that. I have not had a chance to go through all the anecdotal information, but our plan is to extend what he talked to the staff about on our in-service, some of our in-service days that are coming up. So I know we have our first day on the 4th of October. So our plan is, we don't know what grade levels yet, because I know other things have to be covered with some grade levels, but is to talk about some of his ideas. But I think at the end of the day, what we'll most likely be doing is getting our staff to form an opinion, a philosophy around grading that's shared with parents, shared with the community, and so that we're all on the same page. And I do think, if nothing else, it's going to get new staff, veteran staff, looking at grading practices and being a little more mindful of not so much the grade that's given, but does the grade that's given really reflect the information that was covered and acquired by the student? I'll just share one anecdotal thing that I thought was interesting, might be interesting for parents, is he talked about when you assess a student, you give them a test, right, historically, and you move on to the next chapter. He had talked about the idea of, that's great, you've assessed them, most of the time they forget that material, you move on. Why not include information in later assessments that refer back to that material? Because it shouldn't be something that's lost and forgotten. And so that just simple practice of asking students to recall information, but making connections to later chapters would help them acquire that knowledge throughout the course. Just something simple like that. And he shared a lot of information with staff that was readily accessible to them. So it wasn't something that they had to do a lot of research on. But again, very favorable on him. And I do anticipate the board hearing more about our in-service planning and certainly by the end of the school year, hopefully some kind of a vision moving forward. I don't see this as just a 2-year goal and we move on. I think this is going to be a long-standing tradition of looking at grading and being reflective, because we're asking students to do that, so we as a staff should be doing the same thing.
Yeah, I read through that, and I saw some very good points. I was wondering whether all of the teachers use the same philosophy, or how they would assess the grading, because, you know, in some subjects we have 7 different grade level or content level. And I don't know that you can treat every single one of those with the same procedure. And it sounds like what you've said and outlined, it's working. So I think that's good.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Excellent.
I'd like to comment briefly on that. It's an interesting thing if you give someone an A because they have mastered the subject, but they don't follow directions. I'm not sure I want to hire that person. I want to have somebody that's going to do the job that we ask them to do. And I have a problem if they don't do the homework. I think they ought to be penalized for it. So that's item 1. To allow students to continue to retake the test until they get an A or a grade that they're happy with is a good idea that they learn, but it's not fair to the student who has the right answer in the beginning. So I think the grading suddenly gets very complicated, and maybe you need more than just 1 grade for a given grading period. The University of Georgia professor, which I passed the account out to you, that said to reduce the stress, the students ought to make up their own grade. If they want an A, whether they've mastered the course or not, they should get an A, because then they don't have any stress. I was permitted to come to the presentation, and I thank the administration for allowing me to come, but I was busy, so I didn't come. So there's probably a lot more to learn, but it's not a simple subject. It's very, very complicated. And the skills required is not just knowledge. We want performance and the ability to do a lot of different things. And if you don't follow the rules, I don't think you deserve an A.
Any other comments for board forum? Mr. Fry?
I'd like to comment on what Mike said. If we want a certain final procedure or a way to do things, all right, we want something that we can hold on to. Think about sports. And if a student comes in or a player comes in and can't do this, then the coach works with them and they can reach a level. It doesn't mean that when they first came in, they just throw them out and say, well, you can't do it. We've got these guys who know how to do it. And going back to a teacher ought to be able to have some flexibility and bring this student along. But I can really relate it to sports, where the coach is the mentor who's going to bring this student through. There's not just one way, and it's not that, okay, you can, let's say it's basketball, you know, you can dribble very well, but you can't shoot. But you can work on that. So I just want to make sure that, you know, we're not putting these students in a box and say, okay, no, you're not quite there, and there's nothing we can do for you. If you look at sports, and that's a coach and a teacher should be able to do that.
I don't disagree, but I will say this: the coach is kind of insisting on repeat and repeat until you get it right and learn, but it doesn't make up for the fact that you were a rotten player in the beginning. And so I'm not going to give the person an A if they don't know what they're doing. I'll give them an A later when they learn. And I'm all for that extra attention.
Dr. Dutton?
No, I just wanted to ask a question. I'm amazed that 90% of the staff were excited about the presentation, but I'm wondering if the 10% who weren't, if there was a grade level distinction, because I had the impression that the content of that book was less well received at the high school level, but I could be wrong.
The 90% was for the speaker, not the book. So the 90% said that the material presented was relevant to what they do, and they wanted to learn more and wanted to continue with Rick's ideas. So what we're going to do is make some connections between the book and Rick. Rick, the nice thing about him, Mr. Wormley, excuse me, presenting was he was there, he was in front of the staff, he was dynamic. So I think he helped sell some of the ideas in the book. I think the book was, let's be honest, was a little dry. There were some really good ideas in the text, but it's not, yeah, a little, right. Yeah, don't read it before bedtime.
It helped.
Yeah, right, it might help, depending upon your objective, right? But Rick was very good at selling, for instance, the idea, and actually, Mike, you spoke about a lot of the things that he spoke about, which was that a grade is just a marker, it's not an endpoint. We continue to evolve. The grade should be an evolving situation. So for us, you know, when you look at a report card, you take a snapshot, but you continue to move on with that grade. He actually talked about one grade the whole year, and it just continues to evolve. But a lot of his ideas were definitely challenged folks that come from a traditional education system. And I'm not saying that we're adopting things hook, line, and sinker. The objective is the conversation. People are open to it. The thing that I haven't had a chance to do is look at the anecdotal piece. That's the most important part. It's the open-ended question. What specifically, I asked them, what specifically do you want to learn more about? What didn't he touch on that you wish he would have, that we touched on in the book? And what didn't you like? You know, obviously, that part we got some responses on too, so that's the part I'm going to look at as well. But that piece I'd definitely be able to update folks on at the next meeting by the 25th. Talk more about that.
Any other, Mrs. Gray?
Related to this.
Okay.
Is that okay? I just want to express a little bit of worry. I asked about the timeline for the technology decision, and I know we have this looming discussion about a possible cafeteria change at Ridge High School, and I know there's going to be some discussion about some possible math programming changes and the possibility of a rotating drop schedule. And some of these, all of these things, I believe, well, maybe not, I'm sorry, Nick, I'm not trying to have you pass out there. Math may not cost any money, maybe just a little bit of curriculum rewriting, but the other ones have significant budget impact. So I'm concerned that we are, you know, we got to put the pedal to the metal on some of this stuff, or it's inherently going to have to be deferred because of when budget decisions are made and how much work is going to go into some of those decision-making processes. Just putting it out there.
Okay. Anything else? All right. May I have a motion for adjournment, please? Dr. Dunton, may I have a second? Mrs. Korn? We did. Then we are adjourned.